video, we'll be going over IRS Form 8833, Treaty-Based Return Position Disclosure under Section 6114 or 7701. So we're going to go through this tax form. The form itself is relatively straightforward. However, the information that you're required to put into the form can be complicated. Generally speaking, if you're completing this form for the first time, I would definitely recommend that you use a tax professional. And then if subsequent tax returns look very similar to your tax situation, then you could probably use the information from your prior year treaty-based return disclosure to populate future versions of this form. So it's a one-page form. There's only 6 fields. We're going to spend most of our time talking about some of the tax provisions and references that inform the data that you're going to put into this form. So at the very top, just note that for each treaty-based return position, you need to attach a separate form 8833. So let's back up and talk about what a treaty-based return position is exactly. So according to the IRS, a treaty-based return position is one where a taxpayer tells the federal government that a tax treaty between the United States and another country that the taxpayer may be a resident of supersedes a part of the Internal Revenue Code that requires a specific tax treatment. For example, in this case, we're talking about John Doe and his relationship with Canada, and there's a tax treaty between the United States and Canada to make sure that income that is taxed by one entity is scrutinized before it's automatically taxed by the other entity. So the entire point of this is to avoid double taxation. And generally speaking, the IRS, the U.S. federal government, will allow taxpayers to avoid paying tax on a particular item of income or a tax in the United States if it's covered in a treaty and if they can demonstrate that that's something that's already covered under the treaty. So the example about John Doe in Canada, let's imagine he's receiving a pension. If that's taxed in Canada, then it doesn't necessarily have to be taxed in the United States. So there are 2 possible Internal Revenue Code sections that apply here. So we'll talk about those in just a moment. Just know for each position you take, you have to file a completely separate form, and all of this generally is filed with your income tax return. So this would be an attachment to your Form 1040, 1040NR, corporate or other business-related tax return. At the very top, we've got our name. So in this case, it's John Doe, his taxpayer ID number. The reference ID number is a number that may have already been assigned, particularly to a foreign corporation. So this might have been assigned by a U.S. person if they're required information reporting on another tax form. The IRS instructions specifically state IRS Form 5471 as an example of a place where this reference ID number might already exist. So then you would put the address in the foreign country as well as the United States address here. And then you're going to check one or both of these boxes. So a treaty-based return position, according to Internal Revenue Code 6114, that's the position that says, according to this tax treaty, the treaty trumps the Internal Revenue Code provision. So I'm going to treat this tax item, this whatever this is, according to the treaty and not according to the Internal Revenue Code. In this check, the taxpayer is saying that they're a dual resident taxpayer and they're disclosing a treaty-based position, tax return position as required by Treasury Regulations Section 301.7701B-7. So that basically says that they're a dual resident taxpayer. They're considered to be a resident of both the United States and another country. If the treaty between the U.S. and that country contains a provision for resolving conflicts, and the individual determines that they're a resident of that foreign country for that purpose, then they can claim those benefits. But they have to abide by all the terms of that treaty. You can't just pick and choose which parts of a tax treaty you abide by. So if you do choose those treaty benefits as a resident of that foreign country for the United States, you're considered a non-resident. Even if you'd be eligible to file a normal Form 1040, you're considered a non-resident for calculating your U.S. tax liability for that part of the year where you're considered a dual resident. So you would end up filing IRS Form 1040-NR. You may also be able to get some assistance from the U.S. on your taxes. But if you choose to be a resident of that foreign country under an income tax treaty, you are considered a U.S. resident for other purposes besides calculating your income tax. So that's what this section is. And then down here, you will check this box if you're a U.S. citizen or a resident, or if you're a corporation that's incorporated in the United States. So there is also a provision that says the taxpayer will be deemed to have expatriated due to Internal Revenue Code Section 877A. This is if a taxpayer is a dual resident and a long-term resident. If you choose to be elected as a resident of a foreign country for claiming tax benefits under that treaty, then you would have completed your expatriation, and you would be required to file IRS Form 8854. So the long-term resident, you're considered a long-term resident if you are a lawful permanent resident of the United States for at least 8 of the previous 15 years. So that's a long-term resident, 8 out of the previous 15 years. So if you are a dual resident and a long-term resident, and then you go ahead and start claiming benefits under that tax treaty, the federal government will have deemed you to have been expatriated, and you will need to file IRS Form 8854, which is the initial and then annual expatriation statement. So let's take a closer look at this. Now, I am not an attorney. I am not a tax law attorney. So these are provisions that could be applicable, but I've purposely kind of made them not realistic looking so that this is not what you would expect to put in a tax form as currently written. So in box 1, you would enter the treaty country, for example, Canada, and then Article 18, in this case, talks about pensions and annuities, which happens to be right here on this form. This is a copy of the Canadian-U.S. tax treaty, 85 pages if you're interested. So in line 2, you would enter the Internal Revenue Code provision that the tax treaty overrules. So because I'm not going into very detailed specifics here, you would just simply enter Internal Revenue Code and then whatever the reference is. That's the provision that would be overruled or modified by that treaty-based return position. If you had a payer of income, like since we're talking about pensions and annuities, this might be your pension provider. You would enter the name, the identifying number, and then their address. So I did not put the identifying number in here. We'll go ahead and do that now. Let's just see. So let's just imagine they have an employer identification number. And then apparently this line only holds 3. Oh, there's not a whole lot of space here, so I can't put more. I can't put more references here. So there we go. That would be the city, state, and zip code, right? And then in line 4, we're going to list the provisions of the limitation on benefits article, if there's any in the treaty that you would be relying on. So for that, the IRS does have a tax treaty table page that you would go to pull up specific reference numbers. So I just pulled this treaty article citation. I did not read this in depth. I did not actually check this to see if it's factually correct. This is simply an example of what you could put in there and what the provisions are. So in line 5, it's asking, and so that's the specific test in that limitations on benefits article. So whether or not you meet that test or not. So if you've made a request with the U.S. competent authority and that request is still pending, then you cannot claim tax treaty benefits unless the tax treaty or a technical explanation specifically provides otherwise. So in other words, while you're asking for permission, you can't go ahead and claim. If you have an outstanding request, you have to wait for that request to be approved unless the tax treaty specifies otherwise. So in line 5, is the taxpayer disclosing a treaty-based return position for which reporting is specifically required pursuant to these Treasury regulations, section 301.6114-1B? So if you answered yes, then you would enter the subsection of the Treasury regulations section requiring reporting. So when I say to, that goes to, in this case, this is the treaty, the fact that the treaty reduces or modifies the taxation of gain of loss from the disposition of real property interest. So that's obviously not a realistic example, but if you scroll down here, you would find something that applies to pensions and things of that nature. You would also see in subsection C where the reporting requirement is waived, such as in the case of pensions. So that's why I said this is not a realistic example, because if we were actually doing this on pensions, we don't need to file IRS Form 8833. This is just for visualization purposes. In line 6, you're going to use all of this space provided to explain your position taken. You're going to need to include a summary of the facts as well as the nature and the amount or an estimate of your gross income, each separate gross payment, each item or other items for which the treaty is claimed. So if you're talking about real estate income, you would enter each item of income, whether it was let's just say you owned timber, timber producing property, and you needed to include your gross payments and your separate income, like each payment. And then if I were to say include information from section 5, if I needed to put this here, I would put something like line 5. So I would put something that specifies this is from line 5, from line 4, whatever the case may be. But that's how I would do it. And I would make sure that every reference kind of had an indication in front of it. So this would be line 5 or subsection whatever. But you have plenty of space. You can also add additional forms where you would, or additional space to present your line 6 argument. So you do need to provide the requested information as outlined here, unless that is specifically waived. So again, in this section right here, this is the Treasury regulations. They waive a lot of different reporting requirements. Social Security, other types of earned income, such as dependent personal services, that would be employee income, Social Security, pensions, certain income derived by students or athletes. So if you're, overseas and you're in medical school or training or college, if you earned income based on that nature, then you may not have to file this form. So the form instructions are on the back of this form for your benefit. Again, this is something that I would probably recommend having a tax professional work with you the first year or two. And then if this is something that's an ongoing tax filing, then you can probably educate yourself with that tax professional and kind of walk through scenarios that may or may not change, treaty positions that you need to be a little bit more educated on so that you can file this form in the future. But this is definitely one where the first time around, I would recommend a tax professional. So we cover a lot of this detail. We also cover situations where reporting is required, where reporting is required specifically according to the form instructions, and then situations where the reporting requirement is waived. So we cover all that in our article, as well as other filing considerations, frequently asked questions. So you can check that out using the link in the show notes, or you can go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 8833. You'll see the article appear. So if you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, or if there's another topic that you'd like to see covered in an upcoming video, please hit me up in the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.